Hello everybody, my name is Peter Meliaris. I'm a professor at Monash University and physiotherapist. Welcome to Talking Tendons podcast. Today we're going to talk about a paper from our group, and it is lead author Igor Sancho. It's published in Physical Therapy and Sport, and the title is Achilles tendon forces and pain during common rehabilitation exercise in male runners with Achilles tendinopathy. So the rationale for this study was that basically we don't know much about Achilles force for different common activities in rehab like calf exercise, but also progressions of those like hopping, jumping, walking, running, and that might be helpful in our rehabilitation. So we wanted to look at this. It hasn't really been done before aside from healthy people, not in our cohort. So our cohort had Achilles tendon pain. So we aim to look at Achilles tendon forces and quantify forces with those different exercises, but also we aim to look at the relationship with pain. So basically what Igor did was got 24 people with they're all recreational runners, and they were still able to run, so they weren't severe enough that they couldn't run, and some of them were even competing in long distance running events like half marathons and marathons. So basically recruited all these people, got them into the lab, hooked them up to the force plate and 3D motion, and got them to do all these exercises. So the exercises were double leg and single leg calf raises, and then looking at walking, jumping, hopping, skipping, forward skipping, skipping to fatigue. So just sort of your also running as well. So it's a sort of a progression of different things that you might use in rehabilitation. What Igor found, so I think what I'd suggest people do is have a look at figure one. Figure one sort of tells the story of the paper really well. So there's two plots. One shows the individual data for peak Achilles force for each of the exercises, and the other one shows the data for individual data for pain for each of the exercises. And what you can see from forces is that there are two clusters of exercises in terms of force. So things like calf raises and walking are between 1 to 3 times body weight, the way that we did them anyway. We didn't load them very much, so obviously if you add load to calf raises it's going to go up, but it probably reflects what people do clinically a lot. So they're 1 to 3 times body weight. But things like hopping, running, jumping, skipping, and hopping forwards, they went up to between sort of 5 and 6 times body weight. So a lot more force with those ones. The other thing that we saw was that there was a lot more variability in the force with those ones. So if you look at the individual data in those plots, people are just all over the place, and it could be because they're more of a skilled type movement. So it's likely that people have different levels of ability and a lot more variability in how they do those movements. Could also be because we didn't standardize some aspects, like for example the frequency of hops. So that's sort of the story with hops, and that can guide our rehabilitation. The other thing that we looked at was pain, and this is where it got really interesting. Pain was really variable across the board for all these exercises. So automatically that sort of tells you that there's probably not a good relationship between pain and forces, and that's in fact what we found. There wasn't a good correlation between pain and forces. So we took each of those exercises and looked at 24 people and ran the correlations, and the correlations were really quite low or negligible. So indicating that there's not really, if you look at that group level, a correlation between the amount of force they express, the tendon sees, and how much pain output they have. So that's interesting. That is an interesting finding, but not surprising, because we know that pain is biopsychosocial. So you take two people, take them through the same, similar history, similar age, similar, what have you, similar load on the tendon, and they will have different pain experience because their threat level or how they perceive an exercise, other contextual factors might vary and influence their pain, how they're feeling on that particular day, other life events, etc. So obviously pain expression is variable, and this is what we saw So that was interesting. So the correlations were low. That sort of has some implications, I think, for how we think about tendon pain. We sort of think about tendon pain in a very sort of load mechanical way, and that is clear when we talk about diagnosis and we talk about proportionality of pain to load, and clearly we didn't find any support for that, which is sort of one of the bedrocks, I guess, of diagnosis. You expect more pain if you load the tendon more, so you go from a calf raise to, say, doing a hop, and generally you do find that clinically, but I guess the important thing is for some people you won't find that, and it's not just because the diagnosis is wrong, or there's other things like that might be causing the pain. It also is just because this is how pain is. So that's an important message, I think, from the paper as well. So that's pretty much covers the main parts. Probably the last thing to just quickly touch on is a graph, which is figure 3. Figure 3 was an interesting graph. And I think the most interesting part about it is actually the y-axis, and that is peak Achilles tendon force per unit pain per exercise. So what it pretty much shows is that if you're looking at the cluster 1 exercises, for every unit of force, you're probably getting about 1 to 1.5. For every 1 to 1.5 units of force, you're getting about 1 unit of pain. And for the cluster 2 exercises, it takes more like 1.5 to about 2.5 units of force to get a unit of pain. So generally, you're working harder, more force to get similar amount of pain for the more ballistic exercise. So as you go from low to the more higher load cluster, it doesn't mean that the pain, I guess, overall on a group level proportionally increases in the same way. And that probably has implications for rehabilitation, where we're thinking that with these high load exercises, expression of pain is going to be much, much higher. Maybe that isn't the case based on what we're seeing here. So that's also a interesting take on some of this data. So have a look at the graphs. I think, as I say, look at graph 1. I think that just tells the story really well, and it also explains that last graph, because we know that forces are higher for cluster 2, yet pain is quite variable. So the forces, even though they're high for cluster 2 and not cluster 1, pain can be high or low pretty much for any exercise, and that's really a really nice visual of that in figure 1. So have a look at that. Excellent. So I think that explains everything that I want to go through. I hope that's really, really helpful. I'm going to link Igor's study with this podcast. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.